So, as I said in my previous commentary, I wasn't at all impressed with how the Harkonnens were portrayed, and unfortunately, that didn't change drastically after my second watching of Part 2 either. My impression of the Baron was still pretty much him being cartoonish and unremarkable. My impression of Raban was, I'm sorry to say this, he was just badly portrayed. Though at the end of the day, it's not like I remember the character of the book to be much more different than that, so there you go. I didn't care about his portrayal, but I also did not care about the character in the book, so it's a win-win situation. And then with Feyd Rautha, are we totally honest again? Because I know how people love Austin Butler, and he's very talented, and he especially got a lot of praise for this role, so come for me with the pitchforks if you will, but I'll just say I was not stunned by his performance or anything. He was fine, but I was far from being wowed or whatever. Though I will say here again, maybe in my case, it's because I did not care for the book character either. If I think about it logically, how can I be wowed with someone's performance of a character who I didn't appreciate in the original source material in the first place? I think it's perfectly natural, though not obligatory in 100% of the cases. So in the film specifically, what exactly is it that I didn't like about him? Well, as I've said before, all the mustache twirling is just simplistic to me. And some of you suggested that the Harkonnens were the same in the book as well. Well, good point, that in this case I don't like them being caricatures in the book either. Which, just a side note, I keep repeating this often, but I'd like to keep repeating it so that it gets cemented as a given fact on here. I'm not the biggest fan of the first Dune novel. I've read it like 3 times some years ago, together with the rest of the books, and it's definitely my least favorite. And the reason is, I'm just a guy who loves philosophy and overloads of abstract word salads on history, and if you've read the rest of the Dune books, especially the last 3, they're basically a philosophical fuckfest, with much less action than in the first book, which is also, I think, the reason why fans who like the first book tend to dislike the rest of them. I'm just on the opposite spectrum of that. After I finished Chapter House and experienced its utterly insane ending, the first Dune novel felt to me as if it was just Game of Thrones in space, like some idiots with armies squabbling over resources. FYI, no offense to Game of Thrones, I've read the Fire and Ice books and love them as well. I just think Dune is on a whole different level. But returning to Feyd Rautha in the film, they did include something in his arc that's different from the book that I actually really liked. So in the book, at least as far as I remember, he's just this pampered boy who the Baron wants to tutor into becoming the heir of House Harkonnen, and who also the Bene Gesserit are interested in genetically, which is why Lady Fenring got pregnant by him. They wanted to keep his genes in the pool or whatever. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because my memories are pretty vague, but I really can't think of anything that was more remarkable about him in the book. However, in the film, they really boosted his character in my opinion, because they gave him one key scene that I don't think was in the book at all, and it is his Gom Jabbar test, which he survives just like Paul did, which, if it wasn't clear enough for me in the books, well, it's made pretty clear in the movie. Feyd Rautha is the Bene Gesserit's backup in case Paul doesn't turn out to be the Kwisatz Haderach. And it also looks like they actually prefer him instead of Paul, because they found out that he has a sexual kink for humiliation, which I loved. There is nothing more fascinatingly logical than a guy who acts all alpha in front of everyone and goes out of his way to show who's boss. But then in his sex life, he wants nothing more than being dominated and treated like the garbage bag that he feels he is. And I don't even remember if this was in the book. If it wasn't, and they came up with it just for the film, well done. It's a brilliant addition, and it makes Feyd Rautha way more substantial as a character for me. And so him surviving the Gom Jabbar in the eyes of the viewer makes him a much more equal opponent to Paul, and much more of a threat to him, at least in my opinion. The film makes it look like we have not one, but 2 chosen special guys who could take over the universe. And because of this, the duel scene at the end feels much more serious to me. In the book, I kind of remember that Paul was just toying with him, and it was very clear from the onset that he was gonna kill Feyd. But in the film, I, who knew what was gonna happen, I was still made to gasp a little when Paul got stabbed, before he finally managed to kill Feyd. And by the end, Paul looked really fucked up by this duel. So it basically raised the emotional stakes a lot for me, and it felt more real. So in conclusion, although I wasn't really overwhelmed by Austin's character, I still loved it more than what we had in the books. Oh, and more importantly, I certainly loved his portrayal a million times better than what we had in the previous films. God help me forget that insanity.